In this video, we are going to have a look at Microsoft Entra Connect. So we'll have a look at everything regarding Microsoft Entra Connect, how to install, how to configure it, how to sync all the user accounts and the groups and objects that we have within the on-premise Active Directory into Entra ID, how to have a backup mechanism, so a disaster recovery scenario, how to edit synchronization rules that we have, and how to play with the synchronization engine and also the synchronization editor. So this is aimed at complete beginners who are new to Microsoft Entra Connect. So we'll take it slow from the beginning, right from the scenario in which we have an on-premise Active Directory and we have signed up for an Entra ID tenant, and then we want to connect them to by using the Entra Connect software. Now, as you can see on the screen, so I have an on-premise Active Directory. So it is called cloudific.training. So the domain itself is called cloudific.training. You can have it as any other name, like you could have cloudific.local. You can have a non-rootable domain. That is what I was trying to get to. So it doesn't have to be something like cloudific.com, which is rootable in the internet. You could have a non-rootable domain called cloudific.local or cloudific.xyz, whatever the case may be. So if that is the case, if it is a non-rootable domain that you have on-premise, we need to configure an AD suffix with your domain that you have up in the cloud, and we can make it work. So don't think that if your domain doesn't have a rootable name, then Entra ID Connect is not going to work. That's not the case. So as you can see, we have an on-prem Active Directory. So this is a single server Active Directory environment. So one server. So this is running Windows Server 2022. And I have installed Active Directory services, and it is named as cloudific.training. So if I just take off the advanced features view, so you can see that it has all the built-in containers and the OUs, and I have created one within the built-in containers, along with the built-in containers called cloudific, and I have just created a bit of a structure. So I have users over here, and I have a permanent users, so I have created a few of them using an automated script. And I also have a few contractors. So I don't have anything in groups or contacts or computers yet, but we can fill them up as we go along. So now the intention is that I also have signed up for an Entra ID tenant, so Microsoft 365. And in your scenario, we just want to set it up and we want to start synchronizing the users up into the cloud, maybe move the mailboxes up into the cloud or provision mailboxes in the cloud to start with. So maybe you are a startup and you're trying to set everything up from the get-go, and for some reason you want to have on-premise user accounts, so you have set up an Active Directory environment within the company. You could also go for a completely cloud one, so you don't need to have Entra ID Connect, and you also don't need on-premise AD. But for some reason, if you do have it, so let's follow along. So here we do have an on-premise AD world. We have a new tenant. So if I go into my identity plane within the left-hand side, and if I go all the way down, go into hybrid management, if you expand that out, and I have the option called Microsoft Entra Connect. So we have two variations of this software. One is called the Connect Sync. So Microsoft Entra Connect Sync, which is the on-prem solution, which is an application that we install on one of the servers on-premise, and then we run the sync and we try and sync the objects which is on-premise up into the cloud. Now there is a new kid on the block, which is called a Cloud Sync. This is pretty much the same version as the Connect Sync, but it is a cut-down one, which is running up in the cloud at the moment. The features will be enabled in par with the Connect Sync that we have, but at the moment, one of the big drawbacks of Cloud Sync is that you cannot synchronize devices. So that is a big no-no. If you want to synchronize your devices, have it as hybrid Entra joined, and maybe manage it using Intune. So that is a big no, but Microsoft is actively developing the Cloud Sync, and probably the intention is to replace the Connect Sync, which is an on-prem application, with the cloud version, which is a lightweight engine that runs on one of the servers on-premise, and you control everything from up in the cloud. So you don't need a dedicated server for that. And again, for Microsoft Entra Connect, you don't really have to have a full beefy server just running that piece of software. You could have it on any other member servers that you have. But for the time being, we have a single server domain controller and the domain directory. So we are going to install it on the same server that we have. It is not recommended to install Microsoft Entra Connect on the domain controller, but there is nothing stopping us. If it is a lab environment especially, it will still work. Now, the Microsoft Entra Connect that we have over here, the Microsoft Entra Connect, it has been around for a while, even though we have been given different names in the past. So it started off with directory sync or dsync. So that was the solution in which it was pretty much doing synchronization of the objects from on-premise up into the cloud. Then it got renamed to AD Sync. Then further down the line, it was rebranded to Azure AD Connect. And now the same piece of software has been rebranded to Microsoft Entra Connect, in line with the change of Azure AD to be Entra ID. So, if you have come across any of these terms like dsync or AD Sync or Azure AD Connect, it's pretty much the same technology, pretty much the same software or the platform that we are trying to set up and try and synchronize the objects that we have on-premise up into the cloud. So let's get started. So the initial point of protocol that we have is to download the piece of software that we have. So we need to have Microsoft Entra Connect to be downloaded onto the server that we have, and then we'll kick off the installation. So there are a couple of ways by which you can get to the download software. So you could either use your favorite Google. Let's say, for example, I could go into Google over here, and I can search for Azure AD, not Azure AD Connect, Entra Connect, even though it's pretty much the same software, Entra Connect download. And that should bring up the latest version of the Microsoft Entra Connect that we have. So download Microsoft Entra Connect. And if you have a look at it, the version is 2.3.8.0. The file name is still called azure-ad-connect.msi. I'm sure Microsoft will catch up and change the name of the MSI file. The last date that this was published was 4th of the 1st, so 1st of Jan. It's in American, so it's the 1st of April 2024. So it's the latest version that we have. So you could download from here, and then you can run the install. But if you're already on the portal, and if you navigate to Microsoft Entra Connect, and if you go into Connect Sync, which is the on-prem application that you want to download, you could download it from here. So you have the option that says download Microsoft Entra Connect. It will take you to the same page that you have. So let's try that out. So as it says over here, the Entra Connect software has not been installed or not been connected to this particular tenant. So once you install it, then these status will change. We don't have any sync or password hash sync enabled, none of those things. So there's no connectivity. This is purely an cloud tenant with no connectivity to any on-premise AD world. So we have a directory service now up and running on-prem. So a single server domain controller that we have. We want to install Microsoft Entra Connect on this particular server, set it up so that we can start syncing, see how things work, play with it, change the synchronization rules, and set up a staging server, and we'll take it from there. So I already have Entra Connect software downloaded on this particular machine. So let's go into the download folder, and let's get going. So it's a small enough download. It's about 150 meg in size, so close to 150 meg. So we could just right click and say install, and it will start installing the piece of software that you have. So it puts a shortcut straight away, and let's close the Explorer so that we can better view what's shown on the screen. So here it says welcome to Azure AD Connect. Even though it's been renamed to Microsoft Entra Connect, we still have the old terminologies being used. So agree to the license, of course, and let's click on continue. Now we have two ways by which we can set up Entra Connect or Azure AD Connect for that matter. One is the express settings. So this is aimed at maybe smaller shops in which you just want to have things set up in the express fashion, in which you don't get much options to tweak. So it goes with password hash synchronization method. It selects an entire domain that you have and starts syncing everything. So you don't have any customization ability. So the recommendation is, even if you are a small shop, you always go with customize so that you can pick and choose things the way you want rather than going with the express settings. So let's click on customize. Now here, install required components. So you can specify an installation location. So if you don't want to install the piece of software within the default installation folder, which is within C program files, you can specify a custom install location and make the change there. So it's still pointing to C program files, Microsoft AD, Azure AD Sync, which is the a name that was given before Azure AD Connect. So anyway, if you want to make a change, you can make a change. We are happy with the default location, so let's keep that. Use an existing SQL server. So this is the option in case if you want to use a full-blown SQL server to store the data that we have, which is used by Entra Connect. Now, This is only recommended for organizations with more than 100,000 objects to synchronize. So if you're a large organization and if you have more than 100,000 objects to synchronize, you are recommended to have a full-blown SQL server as the database. Now, if not, you can use a SQL Express, and that gets installed as part of the installation of Microsoft Entra Connect. So you don't have to do anything. It gets installed along with that. So the option over here is for larger companies, or if you have more than 100,000 objects to synchronize, you can use a SQL Server. Now, use an existing service account. So if you do want to create your own service account and then manage it that way, you can specify the account that you have created over here. This happens in regulated environments when which you have different teams managing different sections. Maybe some of the support work or some of the components that you have within the company or within AD itself is been outsourced to a different company and they manage it in a different fashion, and you don't have full control of that. So if that is the case, and if you want to have this service account like pre-created, you could use that, but I would recommend not to use that because it's better to have it created by the system so that the permissions are set correctly. So if you mess up the permissions, then it's a bit of a nightmare. And there's no real need to have us pre-creating the account and going through the trouble of setting up all the permissions the right way when the system can do it automatically for us. Now, specifying custom sync groups, we don't have anything at the moment. If you do have any groups that you need to sync, then you can. And import synchronization settings. So the last option that we have, this is only for deployments when which you are trying to export and import the settings from a different Microsoft Entra Connect that you have. So this is a scenario where you already have a Microsoft Entra Connect. You want to bring up a second server and you want to import the configurations, keeping in mind that you have made a lot of customization changes to your synchronization rules. So in that case, you could export the configuration and then have that file over here and use the import file to make those settings intact with the server version that you have as the active one. So we don't have any of those. So let's click on install. So it installs the required components like Visual C++, and it goes through the agent update installer, and it also go ahead with the Microsoft SQL Express local database creation. So it is installing SQL Express on this particular server. So it does everything for you. You don't have to go and create the SQL yourself unless you're a larger organization and have more than 100,000 objects to synchronize. Now, in our case, we are just going for a small shop, and we just want to get things set up with the minimum complexity involved so that we can study how these things work and get ourselves up to speed and master the technology that we have in hand. So let's wait for the setup to complete. It shouldn't take that long. Now you are presented with a few options to select and go through the wizard of completing the installation of Microsoft Entra Connect. Now the first one is the sign-on method for the users. So we have a few options. So the first one that we have over here, which is pre-selected, is the password hash sync. So this is the recommended approach from Microsoft, in which we are synchronizing the hash of the user passwords up into Entra ID. And then we are verifying the password in that manner, and then trying to see whether the user session is a right one or not, or the credentials are the correct one or not, and then we get synchronized, we get checked, and then we are back into the system. So this is the way in which you are authenticating against Entra ID. So you're authenticating against the Microsoft platform by using the credentials that you have on premise. So you're not synchronizing your username and passwords, you're synchronizing the hash of the hash. So it is an encrypted mechanism, and it's complex enough so that you can't reverse hack it. So it is a safe one, and it is being used by thousands of companies around the world, and it is the recommended approach from Microsoft, and it is the simplest one to set up. Now, if you have any issues with having authenticating against Entra ID, maybe compliance requirement or whatever the case may be, the second option might be for you. So this is way in which you have pass-through authentication. So whenever you try and authenticate against a Microsoft workload, say for example, you're trying to access your mailbox, you get connected to Entra ID. Entra ID picks up that we have configured pass-through authentication. It routes the traffic back into on-premise server, and we have an agent running on one of the servers that we have, and then the agent is responsible for authenticating your session against the local domain controller. So here, even though we are trying to get access to a cloud service or a cloud workload like a mailbox, or you want to log into your Teams or OneDrive, the authentication happens against your on-premise domain controller. So if that is the case, and if you have any compliance requirements, you can go for pass-through authentication. The third one that we have is federation with ADFS. This requires a larger setup, and it is only required if you want to use much more sophisticated authentication mechanisms like smart card authentication, which is rarely used these days with ADFS, because you need a couple of ADFS servers, you need a load balancer, you need something called ADFS proxy in the DMZ to make it all secure. So it is a minimum setup of 4 servers with load balancers. And if you don't have any of those advanced authentication mechanisms, especially like smart card auths, we don't need to have ADFS infrastructure. Most of the companies are moving away from that because of the sheer complexity of maintaining the ADFS servers, patching it, and keeping all those servers intact, the load balancers and the traffic. It involves a lot of work. So ADFS, if you do have ADFS, then you can use this one. But if you don't have it, then don't try and go ahead and set up an ADFS farm for that. Now, the fourth option that we have is federating with Ping Federate. So Ping Federate is a completely third-party company which you can use in order to federate with Entra ID. If you have one of those requirements, or if you're already using Ping Federate for whatever reason, then you can federate this setup with that particular provider and go from there. And the last one is do not configure. So this is a bit of an odd option, you would think, but you could go ahead with the installation wizard without configuring anything and come back and choose your options. So if you haven't made up your mind and you just want to set it up, then you can use do not configure. But in our case, we'll go with password hash sync, which is synchronizing your hash of the hash into Entra ID, hash of the password to the Entra ID platform, and trying and authenticating against Entra ID whenever you are trying to access any cloud resources. So the good thing with this one is, even if your internet connection is down in the office and maybe you're working from home, as long as you have some sort of an internet connection, then you can authenticate into any of your cloud services or workloads. So maybe you can access your mailbox, Teams in Yammer and SharePoint and OneDrive, everything. So it doesn't rely on on-premise infrastructure. So you don't have to have your on-prem infrastructure coming into play in this one as a critical component or a single point of failure. Now, so let's go with password hash synchronization, and we can enable single sign-on. So this is the option in which you are logging into the other workloads as long as you have a session running. So once you are authenticated into Microsoft 365, you can use the same session to run into other workloads. So you don't have to authenticate yourself again and again. So that's single sign-on. So let's go with password hash sync, which is commonly known as PHS, just picking up the first characters, PHS, and we'll go with enabling single sign-on. So let's click on next. So here we are asked for a Azure AD Global Administrator account or a hybrid identity administrator credentials. Again, it's still the Azure AD naming is coming up, so which is Entra ID these days. So let me punch in my global admin credentials. So this is the account that probably you have signed up with, or if you are new to Entra ID, or you may have a new account and you have given the role of global administrator. So this is equivalent to domain admin, enterprise admin in the on-premise world. So this is the account with full access onto the Microsoft 365 tenant. So let's do that. And let me punch in my password. Hopefully I can remember that. So it's connecting to the Microsoft Online to verify the credentials. You are prompted. Let's just get all those URLs added in. Oh, it says that JavaScript is required to sign in your browser. Either does not support JavaScript or it is being blocked. So we just need to make a few tweaks. So let's do that. It is a new error message. I haven't come across this one before. So let's take a stab at it and see as to what can be done. So it looks like it's something to do with the Explorer settings. So let me go into Server Manager and see whether we can do something with it. So let's go into local server. It was set to on, so I have switched it off. Let's just see. So we are switching off the restriction for administrators. Let's see that solves the problem for us. Let's close that off. Let's try clicking next again. All right, so it's popping up. Let's punch in our credentials again. Cloudific.training. So this is the account that you already have within your tenant in Entra ID. So if you have just signed up for a tenant, this is the account that you have signed with. So that will have global administrator rights. So it is the account that has full permissions to do anything that you want within the tenant. So let me punch in my password. Hopefully I can remember that. Let's try. All right, finally. So it's trying to connect and then verifying that the account is a global administrator, as you can see in the bottom pane over here. It's examining the domains to see whether we have any custom domains being configured. Even if you don't have any custom domains configured, you can still set up Entra Connect and it will warn you that you don't have any custom domains. So it has connected to Entra ID and now it's asking for the on-premise Active Directory details. So the forest is cloudific.training. It has automatically picked it up because we are trying to install it on a domain controller. If you do the same thing on a member server, it will still pick it up. So let's click on Add Directory. Here it is asking for an account. An AD account with sufficient permissions is required for periodic synchronization. And either we can get the system to create it for us or you can use an existing AD account. But it's always recommended to have the system create the new account. So here we have to specify an account, a local admin account with enterprise admin rights. So as you can see over here, it says enterprise admin username. So let's go with cloudific / administrator. And let me punch in the password. Let's click OK to that. Okay, everything is good. Credentials are correct, and you have the green checkbox. Let's click on Next. So it's examining the Azure AD sign-in, and it's picking up that I already have a domain verified with cloudific.training. So let me just go back and see as to what we have over here. So let me just go back and just show you. So if I go back into over here, it's much more easier in the admin center. So this is the Microsoft 365 admin center. I have a domain already been set up. So if I go into settings and if I click on domains, you can see that there is a domain that is already been configured called cloudific.training. By default, if you have only set up the domain, if you have set up the tenant, you only have one domain being listed, which is the name that you have given for your company or for the tenant .onmicrosoft.com. So it could be your company name .onmicrosoft.com or it could be anything, but it's always recommended to stick a company name or something associated with the company because once you have set it up, you don't have the option to change it. So if you don't have a domain, you can always click on Add Domain and you can go ahead and go through the notion of creating a domain. So you just need to purchase a domain name that you have and then you can just go through the notion of adding the domain over here. This has already been covered in one of my previous videos. I will put a link up in the description and also in the card over here up in the screen. So if it is something of interest, then you can follow that by going through that particular video. So let's close off from this one because I already have a domain listed. So I just wanted to show you that we have a domain listed called cloudific.training. So .training is a routable domain. It is something that you can register with the internet. So these days, you have all kind of domain extensions like, .cloud, .site, .training, all kind of variations. Whereas back in the days, all you had was like .com, .net, those .org, those kind of variations, but we have a lot more these days. So let's go back onto our server that we have over here. And let's continue. So the options that we have is that it has picked up our domain and it says that it is a domain that is already been verified. So we are happy with that. And it is asking for the attribute that will be the user principal name. So it is the user principal name. So it will be selected by default. So let's stick with that and let's click on Next. Now here it is by default syncing all domains and all OUs. So it's synchronizing everything that we have within the domain. We don't want that. We want to synchronize only the OUs that we are of interest to us. So by default, if you select everything, all the objects that you have within your domain will be synchronized up into the cloud. It could include all your servers, your computers, laptops, user accounts, group accounts, objects, the whole lot. But we don't want to do that, especially when you're trying to set it up. You just want to have a single OU being selected with a couple of users when which you want to test the synchronization, how it appears up in the cloud. You want to tweak everything before you try and synchronize all your accounts in the organization. So let me uncheck the domain level and let me just go for within my custom OU that I have created. Let me just go into users. I have 2 of these OUs and I have a few users in it. I'm happy with it. So if it is the first time that you're setting it up, maybe you create a new OU over here, maybe test users or something, and and stick in a couple of user accounts over there. So I'm going with users OU that I currently have, and let's click with the next button. So here it is asking about uniquely identifying your users. You could go with the default options if you have a single forest, a single domain environment. It is asking how the users will be represented across the directories. So we are saying users are represented only once across the directories. And here the option that we have is about specifying the source anger. You could say let Azure manage the source anger. The source anger is an attribute that is something unique within the object. And even if you move or migrate your object from one AD domain to the other, you possibly want to have the source anger to be the source of truth. So now it says over here, Azure will write back unique source angers to your on-premise directory if MSDS consistency GUID attribute is currently unused by your organization. Normally, if you choose the first option, let Azure manage the source anger, it will pick up this particular attribute, MSDS consistency GUID, or you can also specify just to make sure and just to be double confirming that this is the attribute that will be used. So let's go and pick MS-DS, and let's go for C, MS-DS. Let's go further up. There it is. So you could stick with that, or you could just let Azure manage the source anger. Both are fine. And let's go with next. And here, synchronize all users and devices. So what it is saying is that we have selected an OU synchronization at the moment. So we're just synchronizing the users OU along with two other sub-OUs that we have. And if you want to further filter what objects come across into the Entra ID, you can do that over here. So you can say synchronize selected, and maybe you can give in a group name so that just that particular group will be synchronized. But I just want to synchronize everything within that OU, synchronize all users and devices within the selection that I have already made, which is the users OU. So let's stick with that, and let's click on next. So these are the optional features that is being presented to us. So the first two options will only be lit up, or you can only select those ones if you have an Exchange on-premise. So if you don't have an Exchange on-premise environment, these two won't be present. If you do have it, and if you want to have an Exchange hybrid deployment, in which you're kind of extending your on-premise Exchange server up into the cloud, and you want to migrate your mailboxes, which is on-premise, up into Exchange Online, you can check this box and say you want to have an Exchange hybrid deployment. And if you do have public folders, which is kind of ancient and no one uses these days, if you do have that lying around, and if you're an on-premise heavy world, then you can check that one as well. Now, Azure AD app and attribute filtering. This is in which if you want to synchronize Azure AD application attributes back into on-premise for whatever reason, you can select those, and those attributes will be presented further down in the wizard. So if I select that one, you can see that quickly the Azure AD app option gets lit up and Azure AD attribute comes across, and you can make the selection as to what all attributes do you want to have coming back into your on-premise world. So this could be application level attributes. We don't have any of those, so let's just not bother with that. Password hash synchronization, we have already selected that as the synchronization method or the way the users will sign in. So we can't uncheck that because we started off with that one. Now, password write back, it is a good enough option. So the option over here is that you could allow your users to reset their password online. So you could get the users to go into a browser, punch in their credentials, verify the user account, and then get the password to be reset. So it resets the password against Entra ID, and you could get Entra ID to write that password back to your on-premise AD so that you have the same password both up in the cloud and on-premise. So if that is something that is of interest, you can check the box. And again, you don't have to check all these options straight away. You can just get the synchronization up and running. And if you want to come back and change or light up any of those options, you can run the wizard again and come back and enable all the options that is of interest to you. So don't think that it's kind of a one-off in which you have to get everything right in the get-go. You don't have to do that at all. So password write back is a good option. So I'll keep that one up over here. Group write back, it has been kind of depreciated. They are going away from doing a group write back with the Connect sync. I believe they are moving that to the cloud sync. So this is where in which you're writing the group back into on-premise. So if you do create cloud groups, and if you want to have that groups in on-prem for whatever reason, then you can get the system to write it back to the on-premise AD. We will uncheck the box because there's no option that we need in our case. So disabling group write back will cause any groups previously created by this feature to be deleted in the next sync cycle. Are you sure? Yes, because we're not having any at the moment. The last option that we have is directory extension attribute syncs. So if you have, or if you want to bring any directory extension attributes up into the cloud for whatever reason, you want to create a dynamic group out of it, or whatever the use case may be, you can select the option and then bring in the attributes. I will check that option just to see as to what it brings up and see how we can test that. So as soon as you select any of these optional features, those options get lit up on the left hand side, and you will have to go through those wizards as we go along. So let's click on next. And here it's the directory extensions. Because we have selected directory extensions, over here you are presented with what all extensions you want to have up in the cloud. So it is asking for us to select the attributes that you want to have along with the sync. So over here, maybe account expires, or maybe employee ID is a good enough one. So if you do have employee ID being heavily used in on-premise, and if you want to have that up in the cloud for whatever reason, you can just select it over here. So it also brings up the account expire. So that's a good enough options just to see as to how these things work. If you do have any other department, let's say division, if you are using division for whatever reason within your company, say maybe sales and marketing division or HR division or research and development, and if you want to segregate and create a dynamic group out of it, as a use case, you can bring that across. So let's try that out. So let's bring these three attributes along with all the default attributes that comes along with the sync by default. So let's click on next. Now it's asking for a domain administrator account to configure the on-premise for us to use single sign-on. So we selected single sign-on earlier on when we selected password hash sync. So it is asking for an account with domain admin rights to set up the single sign-on option. So let's click on enter credentials. So it will prompt for the credentials to be filled in. So let me just fill in cloud-effect / administrator. And let me punch in the password. And let's click OK to that. So yeah, credentials are right. At least I can remember that these days. And let's click on next. So it's checking for all the installed components. Now it's giving you a kind of a summary of what we are trying to do. So once you click install, we will do the following: configure synchronization services on the computer, enable single sign-on, configure the source anchor, which is the MSDS consistency GUID, enable directory extension because we have selected that. Now configure the techshuffle.onmicrosoft.com, which is the tenant name that I have signed up with, AAD connector, and it also creates a configure cloudifig.training connector. So it creates two connectors. So one from on-prem AD and one from the Microsoft Entra ID. And that is how it kind of synchronizes the information back and forth. We'll go through that later on, and when we open up the sync engine and see as to the connectors and how the syncs run, how we can modify these things. Now enable password hash synchronization because that is what we have selected. We have also selected password write back and enable Azure AD export deletion threshold, and it says 500. So this is the option in which it puts a soft, it's not really a soft, it's a hard limit of 500, in which if you're trying to delete more than 500 objects in a sync cycle, say for example, you take off one of the OUs from the sync cycle and it has more than 500 objects, and you are running a sync and it is trying to delete the same thing from Entra ID, it will flag up and say that you're trying to delete more than 500 and it stops the sync. So it doesn't proceed and deletes those. So it is more of a kind of a red flag for the administrator to say, are you really sure that you are trying to delete more than 500 accounts? Is it a genuine use case from your scenario, or did you make a mistake? So we can tweak this value, but by default it stamps 500. You can tweak the value to say maybe alert me more than 50. So if you're a small shop and if you only have 100 users, setting it up to 500 is of no use. And in that case, maybe you want to set the limit as maybe 20. So if the sync is going to delete more than 20 objects in a sync cycle, you want to be notified and you want the sync cycle to be stopped. We will see as to how to tweak that value. We have to use PowerShell. It is not exposed in the GUI. So those are the options that we have. It gives you a summary of what it is going to do. And it says start the synchronization process when configuration completes. What it means is it goes through the installation process, and as soon as the installation is finished, it will kick off a full synchronization between the two endpoints, which means any user objects that we have within the user's OU will be synchronized with Entra ID. Those user accounts will start appearing up in the cloud. If it is something that you want to happen straight away, you can check the box. If you uncheck it, it will go ahead with the installation, but the synchronization will be disabled, and you will have to go back and enable it before the accounts will start appearing up in the cloud. Now, if you click on enable staging mode, this is the option in which you want to have a second server. So this is the disaster recovery mechanism within Microsoft Entra Connect. So there is no active passive mode in which if the active one goes down, the passive one automatically becomes the active. But you can have a second server. You can have more than one server if you want to. But those has to be in a staging mode, which means the server is installed and ready to take over, but you cannot synchronize, you cannot make it active at the same time. So you can only have one active server synchronizing to a Microsoft tenant at any one time. You can have one or more servers in staging mode. So as a standby, as a passive server, so that if the active server goes down for whatever reason, maybe the data center goes down and you can't have the server back in a reasonable amount of time, you can always make the passive server, the one that is in the staging mode, as an active one. So it's just a case of running the wizard again, taking it off, and then it starts synchronizing the objects with the cloud. The only catch in that is that it doesn't keep the synchronization in balance. Say, for example, you run the installation, maybe a couple of months down the line, you make a few rule changes. You are putting some custom rules to synchronize certain objects. If you don't export and import that same configuration into the passive servers or into the staging mode servers that you have, then when you make it to the active one, you will have problems. So you always have to keep the settings in sync. All right, so we don't want to have staging mode at the moment. We are okay with starting the synchronization process as soon as the installation is finished. So let's click on install. And it goes ahead with the installation and it starts configuring everything the way it was summarizing to us. So it creates the two connectors and it starts synchronizing. It sets the threshold value and it goes through all the options that we have selected. It brings up the directory extensions and any other optional features that we have selected, like the password write back. So let's go through the process. So as it says over here, it is creating an Azure AD, which is Entra ID, directory synchronization account. So it creates an account for us up in the cloud as well. So once the synchronization is complete, once the install and the sync is complete, you will see within the users over here a new account. So if you go into active users in Microsoft 365 Admin Center or Entra ID for that matter, it doesn't matter because it is giving us the same view because it is looking at the same directory service. So over here, you don't have any. So, oh, there it is. It has already created that. So on-premise directory synchronization service account. So this is something that has been created by this wizard, by the installation. So please don't delete that, thinking that it is an account that is not in use or it is a bit of a weird one. This is used by the Azure AD Connect or the Entra Connect sync engine. So that is automatically created by the system and it has the sync underscore and server name underscore and a large GUID with the on Microsoft.com account UPN. So let's go back onto the server and see what else is going on. So it is configuring the password hashing, it's enabling the password write back, and it's just going through the notion of going step by step and configuring everything that we have asked for. So let's wait for the installation to complete and we'll have a look at as to what's going on with the sync. It is now installing the Microsoft Entra Connect Health Agent. So it is an agent that gets installed on the server in which you install the Entra Connect piece of software, which kind of reports the status, the health status of the software with the cloud. So you can see if there is anything weird going on with the sync engine, you will get notified up in the cloud. So we'll have a look at as to where to look and it will notify whether you have any sync errors, any attribute mismatches and all of those sorts. Or if you haven't had a sync for a while, or if your software is out of date. So it is more of a health agent which is used for monitoring and keeping an eye on the health of your sync and of the software that we have on the system. So it is installed by default. You can also install the health agent on domain controllers if you want to have more information regarding your domain controllers up in the cloud. And if you do have an ADFS infrastructure, you have agents that can be installed on ADFS servers as well, because those servers are kind of critical for the sync, because we need domain controllers from which we are pulling the information regarding our objects. So it can be users, groups, contacts, devices. So that's our source. So we want to keep an eye on how those servers are. We also want to monitor the Entra Connect server, which could be the same server as the domain controller in our case. And we also want to have an eye on the ADFS if we are going with ADFS infrastructure, which isn't something organizations do these days. Now, as you can see, it says that the configuration is complete. It says Azure AD Connect configuration succeeded instead of Entra Connect. But anyway, now let's click on exit. Now we have selected that. The synchronization will start to happen as soon as we finish the install. So let's go into PowerShell. And see whether we have a sync running at the moment. So the command that we have is called get AD sync scheduler. So that gives a list of everything that is going on with the sync. So currently it says sync cycle in progress is false, so it hasn't started a sync yet. Scheduler suspended means that if you have actively suspended the scheduler from syncing the objects with Entra ID, but in our case it is set to false. Staging mode enabled means whether you have enabled staging mode. In our case, this is the active server, so we don't have staging mode enabled because it is an active one. But if it is a second server that you have, and if it is set to be in staging mode, you will have this value as true. And sync cycle enable is true. Purge run history. So it is giving a bit more information regarding when the next sync cycle is, date and time. What's the interval for the sync that happens between the two endpoints automatically, which is every 30 minutes. So by default, every 30 minutes, we have the Entra Connect sync running between our on-prem and Entra ID. Now let's just run the command again, just to see whether we have any sync cycle in progress. There's nothing in progress yet. We could kick off a sync. So let's use this time to start synchronizing manually. So the command that we have is start AD sync cycle and the policy type. So this is the command that we have. So start AD sync cycle, which is self-explanatory, and the policy type means whether it is going to be a full sync or a delta sync. So if it is a policy type of initial, which means it is a full sync. So we are synchronizing everything with the two endpoints. Everything in the sense that we are going for a full synchronization. We're not looking at the deltas. So once we have at least one full sync, at least one initial sync being done, then you can run a delta. And the command that you will run is policy type delta. So the sync runs every 30 minutes by default. And if you want to kick off a sync in between, then you can also come into the command prompt and type in the command that I have over here and then kick it off. And in this case, let's kick off a full sync. So it says it's success. So let's get to the get AD sync scheduler command. And now it should say that the sync cycle in progress is now true. So it is running a sync, and it says the next sync cycle is on this day at this particular time. So let's wait for the sync to complete. It shouldn't take that long because we only have a few objects. So let's go back to Active Directory and see how many objects we have roughly. Active Directory users and computers. So we have, so the contractors over here, we have maybe 10 accounts, and within the permanent staff, maybe 10, 15 accounts. So altogether, we are looking at maybe 20, 25, maybe 30 accounts max. So we have selected this particular OU, and hence it is just going to synchronize everything within this OU and the sub OUs. So it will synchronize users, groups, contacts, and devices. But at the moment, we only have user accounts. But if you had any other groups being selected, and if you had objects in it, say for example, if I had selected Cloud Effect OU in the sync, and if we had computers over here and contacts and groups, it will start synchronizing those up into the cloud. But we will do that in a controlled fashion. We're just getting the scene set for a beginner, and we'll take it slow. Let's create some user accounts and let's try and sync it up and see how it appears up in the cloud. So the sync is running. Let's see whether it has completed. Running it again. Now the sync cycle in progress is set to false. That means the sync is now complete. So now let's go back into the Entra ID portal and refresh the all users that we have. So as you can see, you have a bigger list now. So we have quite a few accounts. So most of these accounts have been synchronized from on-premise. Now, the way you can differentiate those is by looking at the on-premise sync enable, this particular option. This column gives away whether they have been synchronized from on-prem or not. So this account, if you look at it, it says yes. So it is synchronized from the on-premise Active Directory. The account is enabled. It is a member, which means it is a full-blown AD account. It is not a guest account. And we have a few no's in between. So this is channel Bing. So this is an account that is created in the cloud. So it says on-prem sync enabled is no. So we have both those type of accounts coexisting. So you can have accounts being synchronized from the on-premise world and cloud accounts existing in the same company or in the same tenant. There's nothing against that. It is not like you can only have accounts being synchronized from on-prem if you have Entra ID Connect in place. That's not the case at all. You can have all these things in the same port. So this is how we set up the Entra Connect and kind of synchronize the user objects with Entra ID. Now, say for example, we have made this initial sync and you want to go back and make some changes. Maybe you want to select the entire OU in Cloudific and you want to start syncing your groups and contacts and computers that you have. The way we go ahead by doing that is, let's minimize AD users and computers. Let's click on Azure AD Connect. So if you don't have a shortcut, which you should have, you can always get to the shortcut from here. So you recently added, you have Azure AD Connect over here. So if you click on that one, it will start the wizard again. And when you run the wizard, it says the synchronization service scheduler is suspended until the wizard is closed. So until you close this wizard, even if the 30 minutes is up, it wouldn't run the next sync because you're trying to do something with the sync engine. So it just doesn't want to do any sync at the moment. So let's click on configure. You have a few options over here. And one of the options will be to change synchronization options. You can look at the device options. You can refresh the directory. So let's go through each of the options one by one. So maybe the first one, configure staging modes. If you click on that one and click on next, it will ask you for the credentials of the Entra ID. So let me punch in my creds. Let me see whether I can remember. Come on. All right, let's try again. Okay, there it is. So it is connecting to the Microsoft Online, which is Entra ID, verifying that the account is a global admin or hybrid identity administrator. So you need to be either one of those to make any changes into Entra Connect software. So it's looking at the domains, which is the same thing that it did when going ahead with the initial setup. So if you want to enable staging mode, for example, maybe you have brought up a second server, you want to make that one as the active one, you can select staging mode, click next and go through the wizard and configure it. That means that synchronization from this server will stop running. It won't synchronize anything up into the cloud and it will be a passive server. So we don't want that. Let's go back and look at the other option. Now let's say change user sign-in. Let's click on next. Now this is a bit of a pain in which we have to authenticate each time. So it again connects to Microsoft Entra ID, verifies the permissions, and it tries and retrieves the domains that I have configured. So here, initially we went with password hash synchronization with single sign-on. Now later on, if your HR or if your legal team came back and said that you can't have those ones because it kind of breaks our compliance policies, you can always change it to any other option that you have, maybe pass-through authentication, which means you are bringing the authentication flow back into on-premise and authenticating against on-prem Active Directory, or maybe ADFS or Ping Federate. But we are sticking with password hash, so let's just keep that. So let's go back and see what other options we have. Manage federation. We are not managing any federation at the moment because we don't have an ADFS or a Ping Federate. Now, refreshing Active Directory schema, so refresh directory schema, this is the option in which if you have extended the AD schema, say for example, you have, at the moment I'm running Windows Server 2022, but say for example, you had it on 2016 and you have brought up 2019 domain controllers or 2022 domain controllers, or maybe you have extended AD with some additional attributes, maybe third-party attributes or whatever, and you just want to refresh and bring those attributes up into the sync, then you have to click on this option and go with the next button that we have, and it will ask you for the domain creds and it will refresh the directory schema that it has within this particular system. So it is basically refreshing the schema cache that this particular server or the platform uses. So we are running on 2022. We don't have any directory changes being made, so we don't have to use that. But if you do want to, this is the option that does that. Now, configure device options. Let's use the question mark. Use the stars to configure device registration. So at the moment, we have an on-prem environment, and if you have the idea of synchronizing devices, maybe your computers and laptops with the cloud, and maybe you want to manage those Using Microsoft Intune, which is the MDM solution from Microsoft, you have to synchronize them up into the cloud, and you also have to make them as something called hybrid Entra ID join. So it is hybrid Azure ID join, which is the the old name. Basically, what we are trying to do in that option is we have those machines already joined to the on-premise AD. We also want to have them joined to Entra ID, so they will be part of both the endpoints, so that you can synchronize, make them part of the Entra ID, and you can also enroll them into Intune and manage those machines using Intune. Maybe you want to move away from SCCM or some other solutions that you have on-prem and manage the devices completely up in the cloud. So if that is the case, then this is the option. So if you go ahead with this option, it will ask you whether you want to configure hybrid join, or whether you want to have device write back. So the device write back is when which you're trying to write the information back into on-prem, especially when you have on-premise ADFS servers being set up. Now, we don't have it at the moment. Now, customize synchronization options. So if you go ahead with this one, so let's punch in the credentials again. It verifies, it checks the account's credentials, checks the permissions, examines the domains that I have up in the cloud, and it will bring back the option now. So it is basically connecting to Entra ID. Now, I already have the Active Directory domain over here. If I have another forest, I can also add a new directory. So for example, if you have made an acquisition or a merger, or you're demerging, whatever the case may be, you have two domains currently in place, two forest. And if you want to bring the second forest as well as part of the sync, maybe you have taken over a company and you want to have them as part of your organization and your tenant, you can have one single Entra Connect server connecting to multiple forests, but you can only hook it up to one Entra ID tenant. So you cannot have two tenants and two forests with one Entra ID Connect server in the mix. So you have to have only one Entra Connect server, but you can have multiple forests on-prem connecting to a single Entra tenant. So we don't have it. If you do have, you can add those options. Let's click on next. Now here we can make changes to the sync. So as I said, that is what we started with. Instead of having just the users OU, we were saying that we want to select the entire Cloudific OU in which you have all your users, your groups, contacts, and computers. And if it is something that you want to use, and if you want to make that particular change, this is what you do. You select all of those, click next, go through the Notion. If you want to make any optional features being enabled or disabled, you can make the change over here, and you can click next again. We want to keep everything as it is. We just want to make the change of synchronization options for the OU. Let's click on next and wait for the next page to load. Single sign-on is enabled already. We are happy with that. Now it's just checking the configs, and it says that we will be updating the cloudific.training connector because it is now going to bring up the rest of the OUs as well in scope for the sync. And it says, start the synchronization process when the configuration completes. Let's click on configure. Now it goes ahead and make that sync change so that it brings up the rest of the OUs as well in sync. Now, one thing to note over here is something that comes up in real world is if you configure the sync options over here for a set of OUs that you have in the company, and later on you rename the OU, the way it works is that the Entra Connect doesn't dynamically pick up the change in the name of the OU. And it thinks that the previous OU, maybe say, for example, you had OU number 1, OU1, for example, being listed, and you renamed it to something meaningful, maybe devices or maybe something else. And it doesn't automatically pick up that change, and it treats as if we have deselected OU1 from the config. So any objects that you have within OU1 will be dropped in the next sync. So whenever you make an OU change, and if you do want to make the OU change, you have to run this wizard again, come back and select that OU from the list as we have selected the entire Cloudific OU currently. You have to come back, run the wizard, and select the new OU with that new name change being reflected so that it doesn't drop the objects. So that's a kind of a pro tip, kind of a real world scenario. Now the configuration is complete. So the next time the sync runs, it will start looking at all these OUs. So anything that is under Cloudific will come into the sync scope, but at the moment we don't have anything. Let's quickly create a group and see whether it comes up in the cloud. So let's just say test for the time being. Okay. Let's just check whether we already have a sync running. Maybe we're a bit slow to create the group. No, the sync is not running. So Let's kick off a sync. And if you remember, it is start, it is sync cycle, and policy type. This time we can just say delta because we just want to pick up the delta changes. I mean, in this case, with only like 25 to 30 accounts, even if we say initial, it will be really quick. But if you're in a proper organization with thousands of accounts, initial load or initial full sync will take longer than deltas. So if you're in a very large organization with 100,000 plus accounts, we don't want to run the full sync all the time. So always run deltas, maybe run the full sync only once in a while. When you think that some of the accounts are not getting synced properly for whatever reason, you might as well just come back and run a full synchronization. So let's see whether our group appears up in the cloud. So let's go back to the Entra ID portal and let's go into groups, all groups, and let's see whether our group has appeared. Let's click on refresh, and the one that we have created, test, there it is. So that group has been synchronized up into the cloud. So similarly, if we go back to our AD world, any objects that you create within this OU structure will start to synchronize with the Entra ID. Now let's have a look at what has happened while the Entra Connect was installed from an Active Directory perspective and from a cloud perspective. So if you go into Active Directory users and computers, and if you go into your users OU, you will have an account that starts with MSOL. So this one over here, so MSOL underscore and a GUID. So this user account, as it says in the description, so this is the account created by Microsoft Azure Active Directory Connect with the installation identifier. So this is the account that was created on premise and that is used by the Entra Connect software. Similarly, we did see in the portal that, so if we switch gears and go into the Entra ID portal, and if we expand the identity and go into users and all users, you did see as part of the installation that there was an account created by the application which was used for synchronization purpose. And it had a description or a display name of on-premise directory synchronization service account. So these two accounts get created, one in the cloud and one on-premise by the system. You shouldn't delete or mess with those accounts, just leave them alone. Now, we also have an application that gets created as part of the Entra Connect installation. So if we go into applications within the gear on the left-hand side and click on enterprise applications, and if we take off the enterprise application filter, which will list all the applications that we have, and we search for tenant, it should bring up the application that gets installed as part of the Microsoft Entra Connect. So this is the one, Tenant Schema Extension app. So this is the app that holds the directory extensions that we want to bring across to Microsoft Entra ID. So as part of the Entra Connect installation, we did go through the wizard and we kind of checked a box in which we said that we want to bring directory extensions, or we want to sync the directory extensions that we have on premise. By default, it is not an option that you select, but if you do have extensions that you have in the on-premise AD world, maybe you have a line of business applications which extended the AD schema and you want to have those attributes up in the cloud, you do select that in the AD Connect wizard or the Entra Connect wizard. And this is the application that kind of holds those attributes. So this is a system-only application. You shouldn't delete those, mess with those application. But just for information purpose, I just wanted to show that this application is set up by the system, by Entra Connect. Just leave that application alone. So maybe while you go through the application cleanup and you see this one, don't go ahead and delete that application. So that is used by Entra Connect. All right, so now let's go back into the on-prem world in which we have the Entra Connect installed. So I have a single server domain controller scenario in which we have a single forest with one server running. Now, let's have a look at the delete threshold value. So we had a look at, said that we have a deletion threshold of 500 by default, which kind of is a hard limit and it's kind of a security flag for the administrators if we are trying to delete more than 500 objects as part of a sync. So let's say that we are a smaller shop and we want to edit that value, or you're a bigger shop or you want to tweak with that value anyway. So for that, we have to go into PowerShell, and the command to figure out as to what the current threshold is get AD sync export deletion threshold. So if you click enter on that, it will show you the current threshold value. So currently I'm set to 20. By default, it will be 500. So if you want to change that, value to something different. We could say enable AD sync deletion threshold, and we can say the deletion threshold value is, if you want to go back to the default, let's say 500. And if you run the command again, get AD sync export deletion threshold, you can see that the threshold value is 500. So this is how it will look like for you by default. And if you want to tweak that value to a different one, maybe you want to be notified for any deletions of more than say 50, for example. So in that case, we have to run the command enable AD sync, and we just give the value that we want. So let's say 50 in this case. It takes effect straight away, and it gets picked up in the next sync cycle. So we can see that the new value has been set. If you want to completely disable this deletion threshold, say for example, you don't really care about being flagged for whatever reason. I mean, I wouldn't recommend that, but if you do want to do that, the command that we have is disable. So rather than saying get, we could just say disable AD sync export deletion threshold. And if you just go with, say maybe what if, then you could see that it just deletes, it just disables the sync export deletion threshold. So it doesn't honor that particular value that you have set, and it just goes ahead and deletes depending upon whatever the sync cycle says it needs to be deleted. So if you have 500 or 1000, it goes ahead with that value and then deletes everything that we have. Now let's go back into the AD sync scheduler command. So that is another one that we did see. Let's have a quick look. We did miss a couple of options. Get AD sync scheduler. So that gives you a snapshot of your scheduler status. So let's go through the options one by one. So the first one that we have is allowed sync cycle interval. So this is the allowed minimum interval by which you can configure. So 30 minutes is the minimum that you can have in the configuration to be supported by Microsoft. You could possibly edit the value and bring it down to say 10. So you want to sync every 10 minutes, which is a bit too much in my eyes. But you will be in an unsupported state from a Microsoft support perspective. So the minimum value that Microsoft recommends is 30, and that is what this particular value says. So allowed sync cycle interval. Now the second one is currently effective sync cycle interval is the effective value that is currently in place. So the minimum is 30. What is the value that we have currently in place? That is 30 as well, because we haven't made any changes. Now the third one says customized sync cycle interval. So if you do want to change this value from 30 minutes to maybe say an hour or 2 hours, you can make the change. And for that, we have to run the command set AD sync scheduler, and we can say our customized sync cycle interval is say 2 hours. So we say 200 and should be colon and 0. So 2 hours and 0 minutes, 0 seconds. So if we go with that value, it says the sync interval you provided will only become effective after the sync cycle. You can choose to wait for the automatic sync cycle to happen in the next 30 minutes, or you can manually sync by running the start AD sync cycle command if you don't want to wait. So let's get the other sync scheduler command again, get-AD sync scheduler, and we should have the value that says that customized sync cycle interval now is 2 hours. So over here, the third entry. So we have customized the value and we have moved away from the 30 minutes. So now this sync will happen every 2 hours from the next sync cycle. The next entry that we have is next sync cycle policy type. So this is where it is specifying what the sync is going to be, what the next sync is going to be, whether it's going to be a full sync or a delta sync. So currently, as you can see, it's going to be a delta one. If it is a full sync, you will have initial as the value over here. So the two values that you will come across is initial and delta. Initial stands for a full sync, whereas delta is just picking up the delta values. Now the next option is next sync cycle start time in UTC. So that is when the next sync is scheduled to happen. So the next sync will start on today, 3:35 p.m. Purge run history interval. This indicates as to how long you want to keep the log files for these sync operations. By default, it is 7. And you could tweak that value if you want to, but 7 is a good enough value in which you want to keep the logs of these syncs and see as to what has happened in the last 7 days. Now, the next few options we did see, so sync cycle enabled, which means, the sync is running. We have enabled that, we haven't disabled it. And the next one is maintenance enabled. This means that we have enabled the system so that the purge, run history interval, and certificate and key combinations, all those maintenance tasks will be enabled by default and it runs in the background. Now, staging mode enabled, this is for the passive server or our secondary server, which is on a disaster recovery scenario. So this is not having staging mode enabled, this particular server, so it is set to false. But if it was a staging server, this will say as true. Now, scheduler suspended. So it says false. So we haven't suspended the scheduler yet. So if you don't want to scheduler to be stopped, you can run a command and have this scheduler suspended so that it stops running the syncs. And if that is the case, then you will have a true value over there. And the last one is sync cycle in progress. So it shows whether you have a sync currently running. We don't have, so it says false. So that means no sync is happening at the moment. The next sync is set at this particular time, and it is going to be a delta 1. And we have also changed our default sync interval to be every 2 hours. So that's the 2 commands that we need. Now, if you do want to stop the AD sync cycle, the command that we have, if at all you do want to have that happen, is stop AD sync cycle. And you can stop it by using this particular command. Now, again, once it is stopped, you can start it by saying start AD sync cycle, and you can say the policy type is either delta or initial, the command that we have seen a couple of times so far. Now, if you want to get a run status of your connectors, so you can do that. So get AD sync connector run status. So this command gives you the status of your connector. So currently we don't have anything running at the moment, so it doesn't bring anything back. But if you do have a sync cycle running, then it will list that particular connector is running, and it gives a date and time and gives a bit more information regarding what is happening and which connector is running at the moment within the Azure AD Connect software. So if I just minimize the command prompt, so depending upon whatever we have in this configuration wizard that we have pre-configured, you will have all those objects being synchronized up into the cloud. As you can see over here, if I go into all users, I have all the user accounts over here that's been synchronized, and you can see that by this particular column which says yes. So these are the synchronized accounts, and if I go into it, they are enabled. They possibly may not have license assigned, but if you do want to have it, then you can always assign the license by either going into the account, going into licenses, and assigning a license manually, or you can have group assignments. So you could just quickly say assignments, and I can just say I want E5 for this particular user, and scroll all the way down and click on save, and this user will have the Microsoft 365 E5 license. So I'm not going into group-based licensing at the moment, but if you do want to have those user accounts that's been synchronized from on-premise to be licensed, you can do it in a number of ways. Now, similarly, we did synchronize one of the groups by creating a group on-premise account, on-premise AD, and that's the test one. So you can see it over here. So our test group that has also been synchronized, and any objects that has been synchronized from on-premise is mastered in the on-premise world, which means that if you want to make any changes to the attributes of those objects, it has to be done on-premise, and then the sync cycle will pick it up in the next run and make the change up in the cloud. So you can't manage those accounts fully up in the cloud just because it appears over there. So everything is mastered on-premise. So all these user account attributes are mastered on-premise, and if you do want to make a change, it has to be done here. So for example, you want to go in and change the telephone number or the display name, the change has to be made on-premise, and it gets synchronized as part of the next sync cycle. So what we have seen so far is how to install Azure AD Connect, how to download, how to get it installed, how to run through the configuration by going through the configuration wizard. And we saw that various options that we had, like setting password hash sync, enabling single sign-on, picking up directory extensions, and all those things. And if you do want to make a change, you need to run this AD Connect synchronization again and run through the wizard and make the change and complete, and then it will make the change for you. Let's now switch gears and see what we have in the Entra ID portal. So if we go back into the Entra ID portal, entra.microsoft.com, and if you go and expand identity and come all the way down into hybrid management and click on Microsoft Entra Connect, this is something that we saw in the beginning. So we have the Connect Sync. So if you click on that one, we can see that the options have been updated. So you can click on the refresh button and see any recent changes that has been made. So it says over here the sync status as enabled, and the last sync was 18 hours ago. So it hasn't been syncing for the last 1 day or so. And the password hash sync is enabled. and we don't have any federation domains. We have a single sign-on enabled for one particular domain. So if you click on that one, it will tell you the name of the domain, which is cloudifig.training. It is active and it shows the creation date as well. So if we go back, we don't have pass-through authentication. So those two options are disabled, pass-through and federation. So the password hash sync has been enabled, as you can see. And if we go into the Microsoft Entra Connect Health, which is all the way down to the bottom over here, if you click on that one, you get a few more options where you can manage the Entra Connect from the cloud. So over here in the quick start, you have a couple of agents that you can install. So the first one is the Microsoft Entra Connect Health agent for ADFS. So this is for environments in which you have an ADFS infrastructure. And if you want to monitor the health of the ADFS servers, you can install that particular agent on those servers. The second one is the Entra Connect Health agent, which gets installed as part of the Entra Connect software itself, which we saw before. But if you want to manually install it, it is there for you. And the third one is the Entra Connect Health agent for ADDS. So this is for Active Directory domain controllers, so directory services. So you can install these on your domain controllers if you have more than one, so that you can also monitor the health of the domain controllers up in the cloud. So these are the three agents that we have. So you can pick and choose the ones that you need, download and install them. It's a straightforward installer. Just click next, and it just finishes. Now, as an administrator, you want to see whether we have any issues with the deployment of Entra Connect. So if you click on the sync errors on the left-hand side within the Microsoft Entra Connect sync, it shows any sync errors that you have so far. So we currently have 4 of the errors, which is in the data validation failure options. So if I click on that one, you can see the display names of the user accounts that has issues. And if you further go into one of those user accounts, say for example, the day Rosa. So if you click on that one, it will tell you what the problem is. So it says it's something to do with the user principal name. So that's where the red exclamation mark is. And it gives you the user account, user principal name that we currently have configured in the on-premise world. And the description says the object failed to be synchronized because the attribute did not meet the validation requirements, the format, the character set, etc. of Microsoft Entra ID. So one thing that we need to note is there's a bit of a difference between the rule sets in on-premise Active Directory and Entra ID. So one of them is that when you create an on-premise user object, you can have space in your user principal name. As you can see over here, you have DA as space and Rosa F and cloudifig.training. But the space in the UPN is not allowed in Entra ID. So if you want to fix that, you have to go back into your on-premise servers, one of the domain controllers, change the space, and then run the sync cycle, and this particular user will get updated. So similarly, you have to go through each of the data validation issues and then fix all those ones one by one. And if you go back into the sync errors, if we have any duplicates or if we have any data mismatch, all these will be displayed over here, and you can go into each of these sections and fix the issues that we have. And it says the latest data is not available because it hasn't run a sync for about 18 hours. So we need to bring the server back up. Because it is a lab, I have shut down the machine, and that's why the sync machine is being out of date. So we have to bring the server up, run a sync so that it will bring up the latest data over here in the sync errors and also in the sync cycle as well. Now, if we go into sync services, it will also say the same thing. So the status is set to error. So if we click on that one and go further into it, it will give us the name of the Microsoft Entra Connect server, which is DC22, which is our domain controller, and it says that it is in an unhealthy state. So if you click on that, it says that the latest data is not available, and we have 4 sync errors. The trouble that we have is that the last export was yesterday around 11:37 p.m. So it hasn't run anything for another 24 hours, and that's why it is in an unhealthy state. So if you go into the server, it says DC22, active alerts is 1. The last boot time, it gives you the date and time, which was yesterday, and it says it's unhealthy. And if you further go into it, you can see the data. So there's no run profile in the last 24 hours. There's no data for the last 24 hours because there hasn't been any sync cycle yet. So we can fix that by going back into the server and booting it up and then running a sync. So let's go back into the Entra Connect, and let's further go back into Connect Health. So we have ADFS services also. If you have ADFS servers in the infrastructure and if you have installed the agents, Any issues will be lit up over here. So you will have all those issues surfaced in this particular pane. Similarly, if you have the domain controllers with the Entra Connect Health installed, you will have any issues listed over here. Now, if you click on settings, you have allow Microsoft access to your tenant's health data for troubleshooting purposes. It is set to off by default. This is typically done when you have an ongoing support call. So if you want to switch it on, and if the Microsoft support guy says that this particular option has to be enabled for them to collect more logs for troubleshooting purposes, you can switch it to on and click on save. But at the moment, it is set to off. And role-based access control, this is providing access as to who has access to this particular resource. So you can see, if you click on view my access, it will tell you the access that I currently have onto this particular resource. Eligible assignments, I don't have anything set to be eligible, so no PIM being enabled. So the current role assignments, I don't have anything on this one. User is not a classic administrator, so that's because we have the account being logged in as the global administrator. So if I want to have access being enabled for one particular user, say for example, I just want to give myself access or another account. And if I go into role assignments, you can see there's no role assignments being done at the moment. If I go back and say add role assignment, I can pick a user and then give them some rights. Say for example, if I want monitoring reader, so can read all monitoring data. So if that's a role that I want for one particular user, I can click on next. I can select the user, select the member, and I can pick a user account that I have within the tenant and give that particular user rights to read the monitoring data. So say for example, if I want to pick the first user that I have over here, and I can say next, and I can put any more conditions if I want. So if I click on conditions, I can further customize the conditions for this particular account. I don't want to do any of those conditions, so I can just discard the conditions, click on next, and I can just assign the role. So it says, I'm providing the Azure AD Hybrid Health Service as the scope over here, and the member who will get the rights is this particular user, and this is the object ID of the user account, and he will get monitoring reader access. So if I click on review and assign, it will assign that particular role to the user. And if I go into role assignments, I can have that user over here listed. So that's how you can assign permissions, different kind of roles. So you get all the roles listed over here, and you can pick and choose the role that you want and assign it to the correct user account in your organization. Now, so let's go back into our machine, bring the machine up and see whether we can get rid of these sync errors and fix these data validation failures. So let's bring the server back up and let's see how to tackle these error messages. All right, the server is back up online. So let's go into PowerShell and force a sync. So as you can see on the portal over here, it says the sync status is enabled and the last sync was 18 hours ago. Let's see whether we can fix that problem by running a sync. So let's go into the PowerShell, and the command, as you know by now, is start AD sync cycle, and you can give the policy type as Delta. So it's a quick one. That is successful, and let's just wait for the sync to complete, and that should be updated in the portal. And let's just see the status of the sync scheduler, AD sync. And this sync cycle is in progress currently, so it is still running. So let's wait for this sync to be completed and see whether that is updated in the portal. So the sync has now been completed because the value is now false. Let's go back into the portal. Let's go into Entra Connect sync. Now, while that is cooking, let's just try and fix one of the error messages that we had. So let's just open up users and computers and find the user that had the issue. So this is the user account, Feliciano da Rosa. So if I double click on the user account and go into accounts, as you can see, there is a space between DA and Rosa F, and that is allowed in on-prem world, but it is not allowed up in the cloud. Now, changing the UPN will have to be communicated to the user while you onboard these user accounts. Now let's click on apply and let's click OK. And let's go back to the portal and see whether the last sync has been updated. Connect sync. Now it's still saying 18 hours ago. So let's just give it a hard refresh on the browser level. And let's see whether the portal updates itself. So yeah, that has been updated. So it says the last sync was less than 1 hour ago. So it has picked up the first sync that we have done. Now that we have made the change to the user account and it's a single domain controller, we don't have to wait for the AD replication to be catching up. Let's run another sync, and this time again delta, and let's just check the status of the sync. It's still running. Let's wait for the sync to complete and see whether that particular error message has reduced from 4 to 3 within the data validation failure section. So let's just wait for the sync to complete. Sync is still running. So I'll come back once that has been completed. Now that the sync has been completed, let's go back into the portal and see whether it has been updated. So let's go into the home within Entra ID portal. Let's expand identity, go all the way down to hybrid management and click on Microsoft Entra Connect. Now let's click on the Connect Sync option that we have, and let's go into the Microsoft Entra Connect Health. And in sync errors, let's see whether we have that updated. It has not yet been updated because it says 4 errors. And if you click on the user accounts, that particular user, Feliciano da Rosa, is still listed. But let's just see as to what the portal itself says regarding the user account. So let's go back into users. Let's refresh the active users that we have. Wait for the list to be loaded. And let's search for Feliciano da Rosa. That particular user has already been synced up. Now that we have taken the space off, as you can see, it's a complete, in one word. And that user is now appearing in the cloud. So even though the Entra ID, Entra Connect Health portal says that the user account still has issues, the user account has been fixed and it has been updated. So these portals takes a while to be updated. So always take it with a pinch of salt, or just give it some time as to for the cloud to catch up and pick up the changes. But it has already picked up the user change over here, and the account is already been synchronized. So it does take a while for the cloud platform, especially the various workloads that kind of talk to each other, to pick up and update the backend. So we have 3 more errors. If we go into the sync errors, apart from the one that we have fixed, the first user, we have 3 more users with the same issue. So if we click on one of those, let's see whether it is the same issue or not. So user principal name. So here there's no spaces, but here we have special characters. So as you can see, it's not a proper E or a proper I. It's a proper I, but it's not a proper E. So it doesn't like special characters in the UPN. So that needs to be fixed before this particular user can synchronize up with the cloud. Now, as it says over here, there is one tool that we can use. It says download ID Fix tool. So if I right click and open it in a new tab, this is a free tool from Microsoft to fix any issues that we have in the on-premise world with the objects. So this kind of picks up and finds any user accounts or any objects that won't be synchronized with Microsoft Entra ID because of the change in the rule set. Like the UPN can have a space in the on-prem world but cannot have in the cloud. So it picks up all those ones and it gives you a list of all the accounts that you currently have on-premise, and it gives you an option to fix those. So ideally, we run this ID Fix tool before we go ahead with the Entra Connect options. Like in a bigger project, if you have a large organization which has been through various migrations from, say, for example, from Windows NT world into 2000, 2003, and all the way to maybe 2016, 2019, it will have a lot of garbage in it because the rule sets were different, and there have a lot of fixes that has been done over the years. So if you want to pick all of those, just download this tool. It's a simple enough tool and that can be installed on a machine, and you can just run it. It queries the Active Directory and it picks up all the accounts, and it lists all the accounts that has an issue, which will give you trouble with synchronizing up with the cloud. And it will give you detailed explanation as to what has to be done. So most of the times those are known ones. So you can't have spaces in the UPN, no trailing spaces. You cannot have special characters. So all those things needs to be fixed before we kind of embark on a bigger migration project. But now here we are just setting up a lab, and we're trying to learn as to how this particular platform works and how to fix things. So ID Fix is a tool that can be used. So as you can see, the download link is over there. It's a public download as well. So if you Google for it, you will be able to find it. So now let's go into slightly advanced topics and see how we can fix these other 3 error messages, or whether we get these error messages somewhere else. So far, we have only seen the Azure AD Connect actual wizard itself that we have over here. So this one, that is the only one that we have seen so far. We went through the wizard twice, changed all the options, went through all the options that we have, and kind of understood as to what could be done. Now, there are things that can be done outside of that particular Azure AD Connect wizard. So this is going more into the advanced territory. So for someone managing Entra Connect and who is just responsible for synchronizing objects up into the cloud, what we have seen so far is enough. But if you want to kind of go back behind the scenes and see how things work, then we have a few more tool sets. So there is two more ones that comes as part of the Azure AD Connect installation. So if we go back into the start menu of the machine, and if you expand Azure AD Connect, the first one we have seen, we have synchronization rules editor, and we also have the synchronization service. So if you click on the synchronization service, now you are presented with this particular window, which kind of gives you as to what happens behind the scenes when each sync runs. So while we were going through the wizards, we kind of found out that there are two connectors that gets created as part of the Azure AD Connect wizard. Now, these are the two connectors that we have. So this one is the cloudific.training. So this is the AD connector, and this is the one that has the on Microsoft.com account, which is the AAD, as it says over here. So this is the Azure side of things. So this is Entra ID, the first one. This is the on-prem ID. So you have two connectors which connects to the endpoints and does the job. So for example, the AD connector connects to on-premise Active Directory and does the job. And similarly, the Azure one connects to the Entra ID and it does the job. Now, as to what it does, we will have a look. So if we click on operations, so here you get a list of all the syncs that has been completed so far and a detailed status as to what happened in each of those process. So if you click on one of these, say cloudific.training, the profile name is full import. So that's a full import. And it says it's successful. It gives you the date and time, and it kind of shows you as to how long it took for that particular sync to complete. And further down over here on the bottom pane, it shows you more information regarding that particular sync. So it says as part of that particular full import, there was one update. And if you click on that, it will tell you as to what the update was. So this is the account that we fixed, Feliciano De Rosa. And if you click on the properties, it will list all the properties of that particular user. And you can see all the properties that we have for the user. So the UPN, as you can see, has been reflected without any space. So that is why it was successful over here. So if we close that off, and that is why this full import and full sync and an export was successful. So anything to do with adding new user accounts, updating or renaming or deletions will be listed over here, and you can get detailed information regarding as to what happens with all those accounts by going into each of these, picking the account and going through the options. Now over here it says the connection status as 389 and success with the server name. So this is your Entra ID, Entra Connect server. So if you're running it from a different machine, and if you want to find out as to what the name of the machine is, that's the name of the machine that connects using the Entra Connect. Now on our case, it is on the same box of the domain controller, and Entra Connect is on the same server. But if it is different, then you will have a different name over here. So the domain controller name will be different, and the Entra Connect server will be running on a member server. So it is connecting to this particular domain controller on port 389, and it says the connection is successful, and it picked up that there are a few changes with that particular sync. So one being an update to one of the user accounts. So that is a user principal name change that it has picked up. Now let's go further into this synchronization service. So what runs under the hood for the Entra Connect or Azure AD Connect or any previous versions of the software for that matter is the FIM or the MIM sync engine. So Forefront Identity Manager, if you're familiar with that, which is again a object provisioning platform or user provisioning platform from Microsoft, it has the same sync engine behind the hood. So both of them runs the same sync engine. The Azure AD Connect one is kind of a cut down version, and it kind of gives you the boundary as to what can be done and what cannot be done, whereas the FIM and the MIM solutions have a full-blown bells and whistles which you can tweak the way you want. So here things are a bit more restricted because Microsoft doesn't want you to play with the sync engines or the synchronization rule editor, make a mess out of things. So in order to kind of understand as to how a MIM or a FIM engine works, let's minimize the server that we have, and let's just pick up a whiteboard. So this is the actual flow. So this whiteboard kind of lays the FIM or the MIM components in place with the two endpoints. So we have two boxes in blue in both the corners. One is Active Directory and the other one is Entra ID. So these are the endpoints. So one is the source and one is the destination, depending upon which flow we look at. So if you are trying to synchronize objects from Active Directory up into Entra ID, then the flow goes from left to right, and the source is Active Directory and the destination is Entra ID. And the boxes in yellow, the connector space and the metaverse, they represent FIM or MIM behind the scenes. So as Entra Connect is also using the similar sync engine as FIM or MIM, these components come into play, although we are not really visible as to how these things work. But when you have a look at the synchronization service, you will see that all these components comes into play. So this is a bit advanced, but stay with me. So the ones in yellow kind of represents Entra Connect in our case. So now connector space is kind of a staging area. So this is all within the Entra Connect or the FIM or the MIM solution. So think of them as maybe databases, in SQL, or tables or containers. So, something easy to visualize. So connector space are staging areas on both the endpoints. So anything that comes from Active Directory will be staged in this connector space. So anything from AD gets staged in this particular connector space on the left-hand side, and anything from Entra ID comes in here as well. And you also have information coming in from the metaverse as well into the connector space. So the flow is in this way. So if I just take off the arrows, so between Active Directory and connector space, you have an import operation. So if you're trying to synchronize objects from Active Directory up into cloud, the first operation that we have is an import from Active Directory to the connector space that we have that is connected to AD. So it is an import. And now between the connector space and the metaverse, you have a sync operation. So that is a sync. So whatever objects that you have in the connector space get synced with the metaverse. And then again from the metaverse, it gets synced to the connector space that is connected to the other endpoint, which is Entra ID in our option. And from the connector space to Entra ID, we have an export operation. So this is where it kind of provisions the user accounts or synchronizes the user accounts up into the cloud. So you have an import from Active Directory into the connector space. So when you run these syncs, that is what exactly happens. You have an import of objects coming in from Active Directory to the connector space, which is the staging area. From the connector space, it syncs the same information with the metaverse. And again, from metaverse, it syncs to the connector space on the other side, which is the other endpoint that we have, the destination, which is Entra ID. And from the connector space to Entra ID, we have an export operation. So in a high level, we have information being imported from Active Directory into the metaverse. And again, we have information being exported out from the metaverse into Entra ID. So it's a bit of an ugly drawing. I know I'm not really used to this pen for writing purposes, but you kind of get the idea. So you have import, sync, another sync connect coming onto the other side, and then an export. So this is the information flow in which you are trying to do it from Active Directory up into the cloud. Now, if you have any device, any kind of writebacks, device writeback, group writebacks, or password writebacks, or anything of that sort coming into play, we have a different flow coming back. So let me pick a different color. Let me go for blue. Hopefully I can manage the pen. So here the first process that we have is we have an import in this fashion. So we have an import. I'll just represent it with I. So we have an import operation coming from Entra ID into the connector space that is connected to the Entra ID. And then between the connector space and the metaverse, it is always a sync operation. So between the connector space and metaverse, it is a sync operation. And again, the same goes over here as well. You have a sync operation, synchronization, and here then we are exporting it out. So export is all about provisioning or writing information into an endpoint. Import is all about kind of copying or retrieving the data. So whenever you say import, it is a read operation from an endpoint to the connector space. And when we say it is an export, it is kind of writing the information to the endpoint from the connector space or from the metaverse. And the reason why we have this metaverse in the middle is it is kind of synchronizing the information that comes from both the endpoints. And again, FIM or MIM solution can have multiple endpoints. So you can have 3 or 4 endpoints kind of writing information into one particular endpoint. So you can have an Active Directory, you can have an HR system, you can have a third-party solution from which you are connecting and importing the data, and within the metaverse over here, within the middle engine that we have, it is kind of bringing all those objects together, and it puts the logic together as to what has to be done. So you could have logic over there. You can have custom codes running. You can have fancy logic to say that, depending upon all these piece of information that comes from the various sources, put these things together, formulate a particular formula, and this is what I want in the output. So a lot of calculation goes in the metaverse. And that is why we have SQL being used for storing all this information within the metaverse. So if it is a smaller deployment of Entra Connect, you will have the SQL Express edition being installed along with the Entra Connect software. Whereas if it is a larger installation with 100,000 plus objects, then you need a full-blown SQL, because it needs to store all this information, does all the calculation, and then move the information back and forth between the connected endpoints. So in our case, which is Active Directory and Entra ID. So these options that we have, or these processes that we have, the export, import, sync, all these ones, let's just flip back into the server that we have and go into the synchronization service and see whether we can have any of these options visible over there. So let's flip back and let's go into the server. All right, so we go into connector, and let's just keep the connectors and the synchronization service just running over there. And let's go back into PowerShell and just run a sync. I mean, although we can run the sync from here as well, you can just right click and run and pick a profile, and then you can run from there. And these are the various profiles. So you have import synchronization, delta import, delta synchronization, and export, exactly what we have seen over here. So you have the import, you have syncs, you have export operations, and you can have full import and delta import as well, depending upon which sync you go with. So let's just get out of the ugly drawing, and let's just go back into the server. Now, let me just run a sync as you would normally do as an Entra Connect administrator, so that we can see as to what happens behind the scenes. So start AD sync cycle, and let's say policy type is delta. I'm just going for a delta operation. So as soon as you click on delta, let's flip back and go into operations. Now look at the time, it's 10:42 a.m. So we don't have any syncs running yet. So let's just refresh. So now, as you can see, there's one complete already, which is a delta import on the AD connector, and then it is going for a delta import on the Entra ID connector. And once that is complete, it is again going for an export. So from 10:42, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 operations being done so far. So we have a delta import from both the endpoints, then it syncs on both the endpoints, and then it is doing an export. So this is exactly what we saw in the whiteboard. So final export coming back. So you have success, completed, exported with errors. This is because we have those 3 objects with issues. So now let's pick it again from 10:42. So we have a delta import from AD, then a delta import from Entra ID. Then we have a delta sync, 2 delta syncs happening to the metaverse, and then we have an export into Entra ID and an export into AD. This is exactly what we saw in the whiteboard as well. So we have an import coming in, you have sync into the metaverse, you have another sync, and you have an export. And the reverse, you have an import happening, 2 syncs, and an export. This is exactly what happens over here when we just run a delta sync cycle. So all these runs are running behind the scenes. So all the imports, the exports, and the syncs are running behind the scenes, and it's kind of invisible for a normal Entra sync admin, but it does run behind the scenes. So now if we flip back and say I want to run a full sync, and let's say initial, you will have the same process, but then you will have a full synchronization. Rather than having a delta synchronization like this one, you will have a full one. So let's just refresh and wait for the process to kick in. So here we have a full import already completed from AD, then it is going for a full import from Entra ID, and then it goes ahead with the rest of the operations. So the full sync has been completed. So the 10:44 once, so 2 full syncs, 2 full imports has been done, then it does the 2 full synchronizations, then it does the export on the Entra ID side, and then it will do an export on the AD side. And that's how a sync gets completed. And there you go. So you have 6 operations being done when you run a cycle. So you have 2 imports from both the endpoints, you have 2 syncs, and then you have 2 exports. So similarly, exactly as we saw over here, you have 2 imports. One is this one over here, and you have the import over here, 2 exports, 2 exports, 2 syncs. So 6 operations. So it's a bit of a complex topic. It's a bit more advanced than Entra Connect software and setting it up and playing with it. If you do have any questions, feel free to put it in the comments, and I'll try and explain to the best of my ability. But it is more going into the MIM world, which is the platform that is used for Azure AD Connect or Entra Connect as well behind the scenes, a cut down version although, but you can still go ahead and have a look at as to what's happening. So now if you want to tackle those 3 error messages that we saw before over here in the data failures, so let's see whether it has caught up. Yeah, it has caught up, so that Feliciano user has been taken off. Now we have 3 error messages over here with issues. You will see the same thing in the synchronization service as well. So if we go into the one that says completed export with errors, over here on the bottom pane, it says that you have 3 error messages, and it says the problem is data validation failed, exactly same one as it shows up in the portal. Now, if you click on one of these, it will give you more information regarding which user it is. So common name is, this is the user, Brachko. The cloudific.training is the domain. It gives you all the attributes for the user. And if you go into the log files over here, if you go into export error, it says that the error message is data validation failed, and it gives you date and time as to when it occurred, how many times it happened. And if you click on details, it gives the error message unable to update this object in Azure Active Directory, which is Entra ID, because the attribute, the user principal name, is not valid. So the UPN value is not conforming with the rule sets that we have up in the cloud, and that is the main reason. So now if we go back to the user account that we have, so this is Brachko, I guess, Brachko, yeah. So if we go back into AD and we go back and find that particular user, there it is. And now if you go into the account, so the problem is with the UPN. So it has those special characters. So as you can see, so let's try and fix that. Let's just take off the special characters and just replace with the normal characters I and C and B. Let's click on apply. Already exists, so there's another user, I believe. Let's just put in B1. Apply, okay. Now we don't need to catch up for the Active Directory replication because it is a single server model. Now let's kick off. Let's kick off a full sync. Wait for the sync to complete, and let's check in the portal and see whether this particular user has appeared, the Brachko one. And you can also see that in the sync cycle. So if we go back and minimize Active Directory users and computers and go into the sync cycle, close this off, go into connectors, you can see that the operation is running 1048. So the first import is done, the second import is going through. And let's just wait for it to complete all the sync cycles. So the 2 syncs have been done. The export is in process. And it should complete, and there it is. Now we have only 2 error messages. That means that particular user, the third one, the Brachko user, has been fixed, and that's why we only have 2 error messages. Similarly, you can click over here, again go into export error, figure out as to what the problem is. Again, it's the issue with the UPN. So if you're not that advanced with playing with the synchronization service, you can always use the portal and see as to what the problem is. So you click on one of the user accounts. So this is being fixed, so that's why it's gone. So now if you click on this particular user, I wait for the information to load. A joy of working in the cloud. Let's just refresh. Okay, it doesn't like it. Cloud isn't behaving well today, so let's just go back again and see whether it fixes the problem. If we navigate back, sync errors, we have 3 error messages. So it still thinks this particular user hasn't been fixed. Now let's just quickly go back into the user pane and see whether that particular user has appeared in Entra ID. So Brachko, there it is. That user now with the B1 has appeared in the cloud. So the issue was that the UPN that we had in on-prem was not working well with the Entra ID rule set. So now data validation, if we go back to another user, hopefully it brings up the error message. So there it is. Again, the issue is with the UPN. As you can see, it is using special characters. That needs to be fixed. So no special characters, no spaces, no trailing spaces. There's a few of those things which are allowed on premise, but it is not allowed up in the cloud. So that is how you fix the error messages, and these are the options that you have within the synchronization service. So we had a look at as to how it kind of pans out with the two endpoints and the connector spaces and the metaverse. This is exactly what happens over here. And you can even further go down and search the metaverse. So you can pick a user. Say for example, if I search and pick one of the users, this is how that particular user appears in the metaverse. And if you look at the contributing MA, which is the management agent, so all these attributes, these two attributes came from the AD one. So the first three ones came from AD. The next two ones, so the cloud anger and the cloud source anger, came from Entra ID. And again, the other ones are from AD. So we have two management agents contributing to the attribute set of this particular user, although there's only two of them coming from Entra ID and the rest are from AD. This is how it looks in the metaverse. So metaverse is kind of a collection of things that comes into from the two connector spaces, and then it puts the logic together. If there are any logics that you have specified, it puts those logics together and it creates the user object or any type of object that you have, and then it exports it out into the connected endpoint. So it syncs it with the connector space and then exports it into Entra ID in our case. Now, if you go back and look at the services, the one that we are using for Entra Connect is Microsoft Azure AD Sync. So this is the service that is responsible for the platform to run, and it is running under that particular service account. So the logon is Cloudific Dash and that AD Sync service account that was created on premise. Now, for example, for whatever reason, if you have reset the password for the account, or if you had a policy that came in and it changed the password, or whatever the case is, and you have error messages that says over here, when you go into the operations, it says no start credentials over here as the error message in the status, that means you're having troubles with authenticating into the endpoint or authenticating into the platform. So if you want to reset the password for that particular account, you can. It is not a regular maintenance job, but if at all something drastic happened, the password got changed, and you want to get things back up and running, you can change the password. So go back into on-prem world, go into users, and then pick the account that you have, right-click and change the password, reset the password. And once you reset the password, you have to update two places. So one is in the sync service. So if you go back in and if you go into connectors and if you find the one that is for AD, right-click and take the properties. Now go into Active Directory Forest, so connect to Active Directory Forest, punch in the password over here, the new password that you have, and click OK. And then you can go back and start the service. You can go back and restart the service that you have. You can also go back into the properties, log on, and put in the password over here and try and reset or restart the service. That should also fix the issues for you. But you also have the option of going into the synchronization service and updating the password over there by going into the properties. So that is what happens if you somehow reset the password for the account, which you shouldn't, and then you want to get things up and running. Similarly, you can also reset the password of the cloud account as well, but that's from PowerShell. So just keep in mind that if at all you do make some changes and change this user account or mess with this account that we have, which says on-premise synchronization service account. Let's wait for it to come up. So this one, and if at all you make some changes, you change the password or whatever the case is, you can reset the password from the PowerShell session. That is an option. So just keep it in mind. If at all you do that, the option is there to bring things back to life. You can reset the password and then things will start to work. As soon as you update the password over here, go back over here into the Entra ID connector, go into the properties, and in connectivity, you just put the password in over here, click OK, and then restart the service, and that should fix it. So this is all about synchronization service that you need to know if you are interested from an Entra Connect perspective, although the whole synchronization service for FIM and MIM is a bigger beast, but this is a cut down version, kind of a beginner series or a crash course on synchronization service. Now we have one more tool regarding Entra Connect, which has been installed by default, although you don't need it on a day-to-day basis. I'll just show that to you. So if you go into Azure AD Connect folder, you have one that says Synchronization Rules Editor. So if you click on that one, it brings up all the rules that we currently have with Entra Connect. So this is what it looks at when it tries to synchronize objects from Active Directory to the on-premise, Active Directory to Microsoft Entra ID. Now we have two types of directions. One is inbound and the other one is outbound. So this is down to the metaverse. We are looking at from the metaverse world. So when you say that it is inbound, it is not inbound to AD. So it is inbound from AD into the metaverse. So it is, as it says over here in the name, in from AD, and it says what it is trying to do. So it is trying to join the user account. So this is from the point of the metaverse. So if we go back to the whiteboard, so inbound is all about thinking of this particular import operation. So for example, you're saying this is coming in from AD into the metaverse. So that's the inbound direction. And we also have an outbound one. So it is the reverse. So if you flip and click on outbound, you get all the outbound rules. So this is out to Microsoft Entra ID, so OAAD, which is the older name. So we have two of those directions, and you have different set of rule sets for each of those. So for the inbound one coming from AD, you have these kind of rule sets, and you can view these rules. So this is user account enabled. So if you click on the view option, you get the description as to what it is doing. So that's the name of the rule. Connected system is the AD one. So cloudific.training is the AD. Connected system object type is user. It is a person. Metaverse object type. It is a join operation. So when you say join, it means it's trying to merge with an object that is already there. So there are two types of operations in the FIM-MIM world. One is to project, and the other one is to join. Project is all about provisioning. So if the account doesn't exist in the metaverse, then it does a project, which means it is trying to create the object in the metaverse. Whereas if it is a join, it is kind of a merge operation. And it is also enabling password sync for this object type as part of this rule set. And if you go into the scoping filter for this rule, it is saying the attribute user account control is it not set to 2, which means it is not disabled. So if the second bit for the user account control is set to 2, the value becomes 514. So if the user account control attribute for an account is 514, that means it is a disabled object. And if it is an enabled account, it will be 512. You can quickly check that one. So if you go into any accounts, make sure that you have advanced features enabled over here. And just pick on any account that you have. Go into attribute editor and just go for user account control. User account control. So there it is. So this is a hexadecimal value. So just click on edit. So it says 512, which means the account is enabled. If it is a disabled account, it will be 514. So that is what it is saying over here in this particular rule set. It says is not set to 2, so which means it's a user account that is enabled. The join rules that we have here is, we don't have any join rules. Do we have any transformations? Yes, we do have. So this is the flow of the various attributes from the source into the target attribute. So the source is AD, and the target attribute that we have is the account enabled, or the target attributes that flows into the metaverse. So we are updating all these values into these attributes, and that gets end up in the metaverse. So we have, say for example, the connector ID, which is the connector ID that we have. Domain FQDN, so it's a variable. It picks up and stamps the domain FQDN value over here, the NetBIOS name of the domain, the forest FQDN. So all these values like object SID, everything comes across. So even for the source anchor, you have complex logic being present in the source value. So you can add your own transformations if you want to create complex logic. We don't want that. If you do want to edit any of the rule sets, the recommended option is always to keep the current ones that is out of the box over there and maybe create a new one out of it. So if you click on edit in any of those, so let's say edit, it says to edit an out of the box synchronization rule, disable the rule and edit a copy of the original rule. Click yes to disable this one and create an editable copy. So don't make changes to the out of the box rules. Just create a copy and make the edit so that you can give a different name, so that it's a custom rule set that you have managed to create. And if it is, if something is wrong with that rule set, then you can click over here and just click on delete, or you can disable for that matter. So don't edit the out of the box ones that we have. So these are the ones with in from AD naming convention, and you also have the reverse, the outbound ones. So if you do want to create your own rule sets, you can, but it is a much more advanced topic. You should be okay with the default rule set that we have if you're a smaller shop, but if you have advanced rule sets that you need, you're a larger organization and you have more complex rule sets that you want to manipulate, then this is the place for that synchronization rules editor. And in that case, you will be having a bigger team who is much more clued on regarding FIMM solutions or Entra ID Connect solution, so that things will be much more easier for you. So these are the three tool set that we have. One is the Azure AD Connect, as we have seen. Then we have the synchronization service, which is the behind the scenes running all the syncs, and the synchronization rule editor, where you actually edit the rule sets. So hope this has been informative for you. So this is complete from beginner to kind of advanced. We could still go further down with the rule editor, but it will make the video much more lengthier, and probably you don't need it as a Entra Connect administrator. You don't need all of that knowledge. So if this video has been informative for you, please do check out the other videos that I have in the channel. Give a thumbs up so Google kind of picks up and the algorithm is updated in the channel's favor. And please do also consider subscribing to the channel, as I bring out videos on a daily basis around Microsoft 365, Azure, Intune, PowerShell, and general IT stuff. Thank you.